It's 10:30. Let's start. I am Osama Manzar from Digital Empowerment Foundation. Like every year, this is the fifth year of Community Network Exchange event, or the platform that we have created to bring in the last mile user practitioners, the last mile connectivity practitioners, all over the world, mostly concentrating in Asia and India. We have been doing it for 5 years. This is the fifth year, and this is the third day. Last 2 years, we have been doing it online. We have had a very, very good last 2 days of sessions on 15th and 17th. For those who are new among the panel and otherwise also, I must let you know that why this year's Community Network Exchange is very unique from the perspective that we have partnered with AIBD, and because of that, we have had a huge participation and intervention from the community radio community from all over the world. Joining, and I'm sure in this one today also they would be joining. Philomena is there, who is the director of the organization in this panel. The concentration have been, and the other unique thing is that a lot of people on the ground, where people are using community network or internet provided through community networks, they are watching all of you, they are listening all of you. They are also, participating in whatever you are discussing, you all are discussing, we all are discussing, which is very interesting. In the first day, I shared some WhatsApp messages also coming from the ground to share how people are watching in the villages, the discussion that is going on here. So that's second very interesting part. The third is that we are not only just concentrating on community network per se, but we are actually looking at how communities' participation in last mile linkages and connectivity through media, through internet, through all kinds of things is very important, especially in the era of widespread digital pervasiveness. So that's the background. Today's concentration is, there are two sessions today. One is focusing on how community networks or the last mile community, media misinformation and happens, and the misuse of media happens, the fake news and those kind of issues. And the second session will be concentrating on how, there are change makers who are making change on the ground when they get internet and using internet as a last mile connectivity. I'm very happy to welcome Nandini, who is the Deputy Director of IT for Change. We have been knowing Nandini for a very, very long time. She has been the voice of community, voice of rights in the domain, and she has very happily agreed to moderate this session. And she will be joined with Philomena, who is the Director of Asia Pacific Institute of Broadcasting Development, and Natasha Badwar, who is the Executive Producer of Karwane Mohabbat, but she's also known as the first, female camera person in India, working with NDTV. Then we have Sarbani Belur, who is the APC's regional coordinator, and Anju, who is the head of Asia Pacific region for Alliance for Affordable Internet. Thank you very much for all of you to join, and I hand it over to Nandini. Nandini, one small I won't say request, but just to let you know that we have Balakrishna Pokhrel, who is the Executive Director of ACORAB of Nepal. He was supposed to join last time, but he was on road and couldn't join. He may be joining here. If you find him here, maybe you can also involve, and when the next session happens, we will involve him as well. So here you go, Nandini. Thank you very much for taking the responsibility. The stage is set for you.
Hi, thank you so much for setting the context to this very important exchange, Osama. I'm really, grateful for this opportunity, and I think that it is wonderful as the community network movement to look into the future and then actually think about like what does it mean to reclaim the democratic potential of media that this movement once began with, and once we tried to like claim broadcast media of radio and television and everything and try to take it to the people, and today we are at an ironic situation when the technology that was supposed to be decentralizing and democratic, that has become co-opted by a few platform corporations, and it is vitiating democracy from the inside. So I just want to set the context for this discussion by talking about the fact that it seems a very timely moment, since it's hardly a month since the Facebook revelation came out by Frances Haugen. And when we read the specific stories about India and how anybody who tries to just join social media and then get into like the natural algorithmic selected feeds and things like that, they finally end up with a lot of recommendations which are generated by the auto feed of social media, which just urges you to join groups, watch videos, and explore newspaper pages that are full of polarizing misinformation, hate speech, and the celebration of violence. And we see there is this perverse continuum between misinformation and hate speech and mispropaganda and even propaganda warfare. This is what is becoming like clear to us. And a lot of it has got to do with the algorithmic business model also, because the algorithmic enclaves of hate like thrive on making polarizing content go viral, and somewhere we are in a very big catch-22 situation. So with that, I would first request like Anju to give us like some opening remarks, because Anju is from the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and the whole focus is on reclaiming the internet for the people. From your work in the Asia Pacific and also like, your experience of the global question of the internet, what do you think, Anju, would it mean to take back the internet from the forces of hate and misinformation at this point? What is it that we need to do? And as a community network movement, how can we construct an alternative internet at this point? I would just like to ask you to speak to this question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
I can hear you. Yes, Anju, you're audible.
Okay. Thanks, Nandini, Osama, Jenny, Sarah. I see also Raj, our lovely panelists and the team. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope everyone is well and not listening to any misinformation or fake news today. I'm really excited to be part of this panel discussion. I don't own a community network, although I do work with people who are working tirelessly to run community networks, and they're obviously doing a lot of good, amazing work. But in this context, I can just give a general overview of what we're doing as an organization and how we're tackling misinformation or information disorder. So to answer your question, Nandini, for me, concerns around misinformation and media information, including in the COVID or health situation, aren't new. And viral hate has become part of this new social media norm where you see keyboard warriors generally using it to their advantage. And it is wrong, and tackling it has become a major and a big challenge. And misinformation has been circulating for centuries in the offline world, particularly in communities and groups. In the Pacific context, you will see people sitting around the kava bowl, which is a traditional drink in the Pacific, or what we call having chai or tea with our loved ones or good friends and sharing lots of information. Some are true and some are just fake. In the Pacific, we also call it the coconut wireless because news travels much faster than the real news. And now you frequently see this on the web or social media. And we all know that the traditional media experts or the journalists are finding it difficult to deal with it as well. And there was a report, I think it was a 2019 digital news report, which showcased that more than half 55% of the sample across the 38 to 40 countries that reported concern about the ability to separate what is real and fake on the internet. And in the case of Fiji, I'll just give you an example. There was a lot of misinformation about COVID-19, which was linked to 5G or magnets. But it's safe to say that we are not magnetic, and I'm fully vaccinated and haven't had any side effects. And despite all this misinformation spread widely during the early stages, if I may say, the good news is that 97% vaccine eligible individuals have received dose 1 of the COVID-19 vaccine. And I think around 90% have been fully vaccinated with 2 doses. So I'm happy to say that the government will constantly using factual information to create more awareness on vaccines. They used a lot of the church leaders, community leaders, also the village community leaders and political leaders and parties to talk about the vaccines and how effective it is. My concern right now is related to viral hate speech that causes a lot of distress to people, particularly youth who are on social media. It has a huge social impact, and this could range from discrimination, segregation, and also now we've started seeing a lot of suicides. And as a result, they don't want to participate in the online world. So how do we tackle it with governments and civil society and other organizations? And what do we need to do to tackle it? There's a few things that we're doing. I wanted to talk about it later. There are 2 current initiatives that we're working on. But I just wanted to pause here and maybe we could move to Philomena and the rest to talk about their experience. And then I can talk about some of the initiatives that we're working on. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. So, Philomena, I just turn to you, in your experience, can you just speak about how do you think, both at the policy and at the civil society level, what should we be doing so that we can reclaim the new technology of the internet? What are the gamut of actions that we need to be taking so that we don't lose the democratic potential of the internet to the forces of misinformation and viral hate?
Okay, so that's a pretty long question. And I think your topic is misinformation and how it affects communities, right? So the first thing that I want to do is talk about what is define misinformation. Now that's a little bit different than disinformation. So I think everyone is clear that when you say misinformation, it's putting things, confusing people with the wrong information, right? For instance, COVID is, not contagious. So that's a misinformation. Whereas when we go to disinformation, that is truly, I think, even more horrific because it can cause a lot of problems. So I think where communities are concerned, we're also looking at misinformation. I think Anju mentioned something about how it got people confused, especially during the pandemic. And then we're talking about disinformation, which can really create chaos and even change governments in some countries, for instance. So how do we deal with this? Now, this is not a new problem because before the onset of the digital world, we've already seen that disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, all these terminologies did not exist. But we know that these things were gossip, perhaps, rumors, perhaps, different names, but they've existed for centuries. So how do we deal with this today? How do governments deal with this today? I don't think anyone has an answer, right? So if you look at governments per se, we are an intergovernmental body. So when we work with governments, they're trying to stop this. But how do you stop this? Because it goes back to, even you say about the government, people should be tuning into traditional media. So maybe traditional media has become the voice of the truth, right? So they have taken on that role. And so we are fighting with social media, which seems to be a very, very strong, player, because they've studied the psychographics of humans, right? And they found out that we love to share. Now, how many of you here, when you get WhatsApp, you immediately share, you have that innate urge to share with others, right? So we do that. And even as I talk, people are sharing whatever information that they get very quickly. Why do we do that? It's a very psychological thing. So we want to brand ourselves. We want people to talk about what we are doing, or we want to make a statement. So way before, for those of you who know radio always provided that anonymous platform. Today we're talking to community radio operators, and they'll tell you why people want radio, because they want to talk, they want to share, right? They want to get their voices heard. But today, social media, WhatsApp, and all this stuff is actually helping you to do just that, right? The moment you do something, people put it on social media. You have to show what you're eating, where you're going. So we are such a society that has become overly sharing, right? So that's one of our key issues. So how do we deal with this? So it's a very big question, but I'll come back to that. But first, perhaps, you should move on to the rest of the other two people in the group. Thank you, Nandini.
Thank you so much. So now I'll just turn to Natasha. Natasha, a lot of your work, like at Karwani Mohabbat, like it focuses on reclaiming constitutional values, right? And as a people's campaign to promote that. One of the things, building on what Anju said and Philomena said, one of the unfortunate things most people have realized is when it comes to, polarizing hate speech on the internet, and especially a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, though these concepts are like, different and important to distinguish, they get dovetailed in some peculiar ways on the internet. And what research tells us is that the old, like fashioned way of responding, that transparency is the best sunlight, and just trying to break misinformation or mispropaganda by showing the alternate fact, that is not really yielding like the desired result on the ground, where there was this very famous study in Bihar that most of you may have read, where this researcher, when they broke electoral misinformation, they just like were charged with producing new misinformation because people are so steeped in algorithmic confirmation bias. So my question to you, Natasha, is always like, we may probably have dealt with the gossip and rumor and like, false propaganda that kind of vitiates democracy. But in this age, like what is like qualitatively different about it? And so what should change in the repertoire of tools we use to fight it, so that like, what can be a way to like convince people about like, opting out of the viral network, or like learning the new tools they need to recognize? What's been your experience or your thoughts on this?
Hi. Yeah, so like everybody else is spelling out as well, we really are at some kind of a peak in human age in terms of the way in which propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, hate speech is being platformed. And in India, what we are experiencing is that it's a very multi-layered and very powerful kind of assault on the consciousness of the people. We are not just talking about rumors, or people's propensity to believe things that that their bias already confirms. We are talking about big tech collaborating, colluding with the government, as well as with very large groups, allowing hate speech to continue, not actually implementing their own norms about removing content that violates community standards. We are talking about also a government that seems to be invested in a fair amount of doublespeak, in a fair amount of, wanting to obfuscate issues in a way that we have, particularly in the pandemic months, it's almost going to be 2 years now, particularly now. So when there'll be announcements that everybody is getting food, but on the ground, there will be no food grain that is being distributed. There will be announcements that vaccines are free, but on the ground, you can't find free vaccines. There will be announcements that the number of deaths or the number of cases of COVID have been contained, but on the ground, actually, the reality is very different. Plus, we've got mainstream media that is now being dubbed for a long time as Godi media, as in, lapdog media. So the most powerful fourth pillar of democracy is completely compromised. And, in collusion with big corporates and a government that is not invested in trying to get the truth to the people. So those spaces are completely compromised. The two big, spaces where one could seek help. One is the government, and the other is mainstream media are not doing their job right now. So it kind of, in that kind of scenario, and of course, social media, big tech is not really on the right side either. So in that kind of scenario, we find that again and again, small groups, individual groups, people's coalitions getting together and kind of putting all their energy into trying to dissipate disinformation and trying to put in content that is an alternate to it. So we've got groups like Alt News, we've got independent, smaller media groups like The Wire and Scroll and Article 14. And we've got a small group like ours, Karwan-e-Mohabbat, for the last 3 years. We've been doing the work that most of us in this group would otherwise have been doing as part of mainstream media. But because there is no space there for filmmakers, for journalists to be able to put out the kind of stories that they're invested in, that they feel must be taken to the people, you find alternate ways, alternate funding, voluntary efforts by individuals doing this kind of work. As you say, we're not seeing a huge impact. But I think that we also don't have ways in which to measure the impact. And that's an experience that that almost all of these groups that I mentioned will share with you. So one of the things now, because we don't have access to mainstream media platforms, what we do when we create the documentary films and the short videos of Karwan-e-Mohabbat is that we use all our social media accounts to put them out. We have found that on Facebook, there is a complete pushback that, an account that was earlier doing very well for the last 1 year seems to just not be able to move. And even if we promote content, it does not go to the kind of audiences that we want to go to. So we move to other alternate spaces. Twitter's working, WhatsApp's working, Instagram is still working. They haven't made that connection yet. We break down our own content into reels, and we find, because we have access to the feedback that we get, we find that there is a huge audience that is hungry for this content. There is a huge audience that is waiting for somebody to create and put it out there so that they can run with it. And to be able to feed that audience becomes one's immediate aim. To be able to build a network between all of these small groups, as we're doing right now in a sense, is the larger aim, because it's by boosting each other's content and providing support to each other, because a lot of us are constantly getting our accounts reported, our content tagged as disinformation itself. Once in a while, we'll get blacklisted. So it is for us, and when you create enough of an uproar online, your accounts are opened up again. So those really are, you have to kind of believe in your audience. You have to pay attention to the feedback you're getting. You have to look for more and more offline modes. So that's something we've begun to do. Use our social media outreach to reach out to groups that will invite us to do offline screenings. And we have to keep building the network that is supportive of each other.
Thank you so much for that, Natasha. Now I turn to
Nandini.
Yeah.
Nandini, I just want to interject. Natasha is sitting in a community network shed in a village in UP, and she's sharing there. I mean, she's live there from the community network shed. I'm saying,
This is a DEF center, and yeah, I'm glad to show this off.
That's amazing. Thanks for that interjection. Thanks for sharing that. Yes. Now we turn to Sarbani. So Natasha was so beautifully explaining to us, all the time we see that corporate controlled media will not make the space for people's content. This is like a classical problem that we have always faced. And Sarbani, from your own experience of doing the community networks program with APC, could you just share a bit about what does it mean to extend the community networks thinking from just claim over broadband infrastructure, which is the traditional roots of the movement, to also thinking about what it means to redesign the platform layer or content layer? What's the sum of the thinking in these areas? Because a lot of people, especially in the West, have been thinking a lot about what would it mean to create an alternative social media that's not controlled by private profit, right? But we know that's also quite difficult. But from within the traditions of the community networks movement, is there any path we can follow? Any experiments that come to mind? This is my question to you.
Sarbani, you have to unmute.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Nandini, and thanks for the panelists for giving their.
Can you increase your volume a bit? I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
You can hear me now clearly?
No, you're very faint.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, sorry. So I would like to mention that in APC, as part of the Association for Progressive Communications, we actually work on not only seeding community networks to grow in enabling connectivity to the unconnected or the underserved locations, but we also look at how community networks can utilize, what are the different utilization of that connectivity. And here by connectivity, I don't mean only online connectivity. It is also a mix of online and offline thing. Because when we if you look at just online connectivity, then it is very difficult for the communities to sustain this connectivity over a long period of time, because they don't have that money or the resources to sustain it for a long time. So we make a mix of online and offline connectivity. The offline connectivity is a type of connectivity which shows that you can be offline and yet use the connectivity and its qualities in a best possible manner. Some of the examples that we have done are on community radio. Community radio is being used offline, where content creation comes about from the communities themselves. And this content is based on biodiversity preservation, because these are indigenous tribes and they have a lot of information about their biodiversity in the village. They know where a particular type of tree is located, or what type of crop has to be, or what type of paddy has to be sown at what time of the year, how much of water is needed. So it is all local knowledge that is there within the community, and this knowledge is not written down and documented anywhere. So this knowledge is gathered or shared by the community through community radio or through an offline platform which has been created for them, and that is where the knowledge is stored. It is like a repository of knowledge in a local access server. And this knowledge, out of this knowledge, they have the right to decide which type of knowledge go into the internet, which type of knowledge should not go into the internet. So that type of decision-making thing has been given in the hands of the community. Now here, what happens is that, for example, music is something that they don't want to put it out into the internet directly. That is something that they would like to market it themselves. And we respect that, no problem. But their art and craft, so the art and craft is something that they would like to put it out in the internet for people to view it and perhaps make products out of it, and they can sell it online. So these are some of the things that happens in the offline space, and which only the local access server is connected to the internet, for which only some part of the information goes into the internet. Now, this is the project that was funded by APC in 2019. Just before the pandemic struck, this project was set up. I mean, we got funded and we set up the community network in a remote location of Pathardi in Jawahar, Maharashtra. This is one of the remotest villages of Maharashtra, in very close by to Mumbai, 5 hours drive from Mumbai, yet the village is not connected. And it is not connected yet. It's not connected. So what we set up is a cellular router, a SIM card based cellular router on a tower that we set up for them. And we empowered a lady from the village to enable the banking services to be enabled to the village. Now, the rest of the network is completely an offline network. And they use the offline network for the purposes that I have mentioned. In March, when the pandemic struck and the people went back to their villages from the city, the lockdown began. I got a number of phone calls from the village saying that the primary healthcare center has shut down because the Asha Didis, the Asha workers and the ANMs, we had to look after to the people in the village. Because if someone has come from the city, then they have to be quarantined for 14 days, follow all the instructions and things of that sort. Now, I am a new mother. A lady calls up and says, I am a new mother and I don't know how to breastfeed my child. I don't have sufficient milk and how to breastfeed my child. The formula milk companies have now come to these villages, to our village, and they are giving us, distributing formula milk. Now, this was something that was, and they told you are not supposed to breastfeed your child during this pandemic because then you can transmit the virus from the mother to the child. So this was an information that came to us and we had to deal with that information. In a location where there is no connectivity, we were dealing with this information. And it was very difficult for us. So we immediately went into action by enabling videos, tutorial videos, spoken tutorial videos that we have created here at IIT Bombay, and we have enabled those within the community, shared it through WhatsApp. So this is some type of examples that I'm telling you, sharing my experiences, that we are just not working on enabling connectivity in any form, but the utilization of the connectivity by which it can benefit the people in the last mile. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarbani, for that very eloquent explanation of how it's the cultures of use that matter in reclaiming the power of internet as media, and it's not just about the broadband as some mute connectivity infrastructure. And the point that the negotiation between local knowledge cultures and the global knowledge culture about what goes online and what stays communities offline. That's always a contextual decision communities autonomously have to take. That's very well taken. I now would like to turn to Balkrishna from Akorab, Nepal, to just ask him to reflect on, like, what are the new challenges of operating community radio in today's context when the internet has come. There's a lot of diffusion. Most people, even at the village level, are turning to smartphones, and especially the next generation think of WhatsApp as probably a more cool medium and things like that. Or maybe all these assumptions are wrong and I may be totally mistaken. But from your experience, could you just talk a bit about, like, what does it mean for us to be doing community radio in this post-internet context, and what are the new challenges?
Thank you very much, Nandini. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity in this forum. I would like to share one survey. I would like to start my saying from one survey. There are different surveys conducted in Nepal. During COVID period, one survey was conducted by Sharecast Nepal, and the survey showed that for 71% of the people, main source of information is radio during the pandemic. Similarly, 58% people rely on television, 39% people rely on Facebook, 36% rely on mobile, and only 90% are rely on online portal. I mean to say that there is a huge potentiality of the radio for information dissemination in Nepal. And in most of the districts, in more than 30 districts, there is no other access rather than community radio. So community radio has to play strong role for information dissemination in the context of Nepal. As you said, we are facing different type of problem. The listening trend has been changed. Now the people do not listen the radio from the radio set. They do listen from the mobile set. They do listen from internet. They do listen from Facebook and other sources. I would say here that we have operated one network, community information network, which is connecting 360 community radio across the country. And what we do, we are now conducting different type of radio program. We are broadcasting news, and we also put the news in the Facebook page as well. So through the Facebook page, most of the people in urban, like in rural part, can have access. And another example, we have started the Facebook radio program. We conducted the radio program from the studio, but at the same time, we broadcast this from Facebook with sign language. In this way, we are trying to capture the listeners in the context of Nepal.
Thank you so much, Balkrishna. Now I would just like to call on Osama to just share key highlights from DEF's work on understanding the new misinformation trends, and what kind of strategies does that research show us may be useful in fighting that and bringing back the citizen literacy to be able to unpack certain myths and respond in a democratic way.
So, Nandini, I think you already got a huge panel, and I'm sure they need more talking time. So I will just finish in 2 minutes, saying that both in the time of COVID, of wave 1 and wave 2, we had done a lot of survey, and you know that DEF works far and wide across the country, almost about 1,000 locations. So our experience said that wherever we were present with digital entrepreneurs and with digital centers, or through our connectivity links and things like that, it was advantageous for us to fight misinformation and fake news, because there was somebody who could tell people that what is right, what is wrong, what is authentic, and so on and so forth. Needless to mention that the whole country was suffering from misinformation of all kind. Misinformation does not always have to be devastatingly, effective. I mean, you can say that it's a gossip, but or unless it is political, it is taken very lightly. But in COVID time, we found that how health-related misinformation affected people very largely, and several of such misinformation are very closely linked to faith and tradition and non-scientific belief and things like that. So basically trying to tell that if you misinformation is usually top down, and it when it goes far and wide, it becomes rumor. And then it converts into, maybe in some cases, lynching, in some cases kind of, throw out the person from the village for some reason or something like that. But unlike in cities where you are hyper connected, you have many means to figure out what is right or wrong. You have many multiple accesses to right kind of information, including search or reverse search or photo search or whatever, or ask right kind of people. But in village level, it becomes very difficult. Where do you find out? So what we learned is that in the hyper connected digital world, we might be reaching to a point where we might be needing a professionally assigned and recognized ombudsman kind of person, or somebody who will be reached out. Is it right? Is it wrong? Have you heard of this? So basically this person is like information owner of the authentic information, owner of everything, or it's like a FYI checker or a FAQ checker, dynamic FAQ checker or something like that. And that's what our learning is, that because of and by the way, community radio, I found if wherever there is internet and where there is community radio, anything being broadcasted from community radio is being believed. Anything that is coming on WhatsApp is not believed, or on internet is not believed. So, internet you are using as a medium, as a communication tool, and both broadcasting. But here is the difference, because there is an ownership of taking accountability and responsibility of what you are saying through the medium that you are saying. So it's very important that what we are talking about in a hyper-connected world is that how do we sanitize, or how do you make the communication channel more full of sanity. And that is the point where we are talking about when the technology become a democratic tool of communication. And if the community network is a democratic tool of technological usage of communication at a last mile, then it is very important to also think is that what are we communicating, and are we safeguarding our people from the information that we are sharing. Yeah, that's the point that I want to. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So now I think we have about 15 minutes to wrap up our discussion. So we have the time to do one round of closing remarks from Anju, Philomena, Sarbani, and Natasha. So Anju, in 3 minutes, could you just tell your top insights about the initiative that you wanted to talk about from the Asia Pacific, and what does it tell us in terms of policy and civil society action directions to reclaim community networks?
Hey, thanks, Nandini. I've been listening to all the great discussions and great points from my panel members. So we are supporting the Asia Foundation project team. We're working on a misinformation and information disorder capacity project in the Pacific, starting with Fiji and PNG. So we're supporting this initiative and working closely with the Online Safety Commission for Fiji, the PNG government, and various other organizations. So they're currently developing a stakeholder list And we'll be including churches, ministries, schools, communities, Ministry of Health, a few doctors and nurses, media, disaster risk teams, because there's a lot of issues in relation to climate change information. And then we'll be looking at working with telcos, regulators, and civil societies. So they'll be establishing a communication protocol and doing stakeholder interviews and consultations. And then we'll be reaching out to champions who will speak the truth. Big target is in the communities and how these communities could participate in the misinformation project. Some of these group sessions will take place in local languages, which is something that we are pushing for. And they will consolidate findings, and then we'll look at doing some key interventions with the stakeholders. And one of the things that we continue to do is we collaborate with the news organizations. So the Asia Foundation is helping them to develop products, providing tools and services for journalists, and helping people get information so that they can make smart choices about what they read. And we, as the Alliance for Affordable Initiative and Web Foundation, we believe, and of course you all believe, that the web is a critical tool to keep people informed about facts and evidence-based research. So one of the roles that we continue to play, and we continue to encourage governments, is to provide clear, up-to-date information to the public. So we work with the medical community, we talk to the tech giants and companies to reduce the spread of information. And just as an example, like Meta or Facebook, as it used to be called, so through some of the direct interventions, they're building and testing and iterating new products to identify and limit the spread of false information. And with the civil societies, what we do is we continue to talk to them and work with them. But one of the things that we encouraging through the Web Foundation as well is encouraging the citizens because they play a significant role. So we tell them to share credible information and taking steps to curb the spread of misleading claims. So, you've all mentioned viral hate speech and encouraging, people to say the right things and share the right information. We could do it in small steps, right? We could do it with our friends, we could do it with our families. And I just wanted to do a quick example. My grandfather, and because Balkrishna mentioned the radio, community radio, my grandfather is 96 years old and he doesn't care about the fake news. He always watches TV and listens to radio using his mobile phone, and he will always believe what we tell him, because the one thing that I do want to mention, there's the trust factor between us. He trusts us to give him the right, correct information and not believing his neighbor who constantly comes over to talk about rubbish. And he told me that he knows how to differentiate between the fake and real news. And because it's always been general traditional knowledge for them, it's been happening years and it's nothing new. He heard about the vaccines and how people were spreading fake news about it. But despite all this, he chose to get fully vaccinated at this age. And right now he is my champion because he shares his story with our family members who refuse to get vaccinated. He tells them that he feels like Superman now and ready to live for another 10 years. I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anju. Now I turn to Philomena. After hearing everyone's reflections on this relationship between broadcast and new media and how in both cultures we need to do more work to build citizen trust and also reclaim their potential, what are your thoughts on the directions by which we could manage this hybrid relationship? And you don't have to necessarily answer this question. If you want to reflect on any other aspect anyone said, also please feel free to ignore the question and just freely reflect.
Okay, thank you, Nandini. Right, so very interesting. I think I've been listening a lot to all the ladies talking, from Natasha to Sarvani and Anju, and also what Balkrishna and Osama spoke. There's one thing that I want to point out. I think Natasha mentioned this, that media should always be the fourth pillar for democracy. I mean, that's something why media even began. The anonymous platform given by radio and television programming. I mean, this is such a crucial role that media players, be it community radio, be it traditional radio, television. This is one thing that everyone has to remember, that we have a responsibility to the audience, right? And for that, I think Anju mentioned about the truth that her grandfather listens to only her because he knows her so well. So I think the fact here is traditional media players, community radio players, you've got to look at the information that you're giving has got to be the truth. Sometimes I understand from what Natasha was talking about, the government versus the real story, or misinformation about some products that are being given somewhere, and then you go there and then there's nothing. So those are really fraudulent practices. But it's good to have a voice, an advocacy voice for the people as well, for communities, for voices that are not heard. So she's actually championing people's voices of people who need to be heard. So there you go. These are interesting stories that I'm listening. Or how Salvani is actually, helping women bust myths about powdered milk, for instance. Now look at the way people are going in creating misinformation right there in the communities, right, without even using social media, right? So we're seeing this. I'm talking this because I'm dealing with so many media bodies. At AIBD, we have 100 over media organizations, both government as well as private, and also community radio. My colleague from ACORAP, Balkrishna, was sharing. So the thing is, what I'm trying to say is the pandemic has taught us that misinformation is so dangerous. Osama, you mentioned this as well, because one of the things we noticed is during the pandemic, there's been so much of misinformation about what is COVID, what is the vaccine about, and then coming up with traditional treatments, which probably could not work this time around. So the pandemic has taught us that misinformation has created some havoc, right? And it's time for all of us, be it community radio, be it traditional radio, or I don't know about social media operators, because most often when you study media, or social media, there is a need, there is an ardent desire for people to architect information, right? Architect information that could only, benefit a particular group who is trying to architect an information, right? Or even bloggers, or even people, not everyone, they have some personal agenda. Right? So what we need to do as community media, as people who hold on to giving the truth to communities or to audiences, is to ensure that we practice ethical ethics. Ethics is a great part of the broadcasting industry, and this is something that we should do, right? So this is something, and I think this is the way forward. At AIBD, we've done a lot of research between the pandemic and the trustworthiness of traditional media. So in this respect, even though Natasha mentioned about traditional media being something else, government media or government mouthpieces, but in the aspect of COVID-19, there has been many countries good response by traditional media during this period. And I think community radios have played a huge role in bringing the right information. We've seen this in Bhutan, we've seen this in Nepal. We've seen how people are actually bringing the right information to communities that are not connected. So what I want to say is that uphold media as the fourth pillar of democracy, and look at disinformation, misinformation. There are not only architects in government media, but you also have architects of disinformation in social media. You know, people who are opinion leaders who are trying to create, or this could be a political turnoff, it could be creating a ruckus in society, but it's happening, right? So as media practitioners, whether you are on social media or community or whatever, media practitioners have to uphold the truth and to ensure that whatever we're doing, we create an information that is correct, fact-checking, whatnot. But most of all, I think consumers of media need to be taught media literacy, because you can't change disinformation, misinformation, all that terminology. It will be there forever. But what we can change is the way people accept information. So talking to Sarvani, telling people, educating people about the importance of mother's milk, I think is far more important than actually doing anything more. So the right information, right content need to be given to the people whenever you're operating a radio or community radio or whatnot. So thank you. Nandini, I'm giving it back to you. No more words from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Philomena. That was like very, very helpful. Natasha, I just now turn to you. So you had raised this point earlier that it may not be possible now to reclaim the democratic potential of media in quite the same way, because neither is our social media independent, and there is also the intrusive role of the state and new forms of state media authoritarianism, state control over media that we are witnessing. So my question to you is, do you think that this also shows us something about the way we need to change the way we start thinking about the way we regulate social media? It's increasingly becoming clear they are not neutral platforms. So do you think we should kind of like treat them as publishers, or would that be another kind of mistake and we need to regulate them differently?
So social media, in a sense, in many societies like India, for example, social media is what we're left with. After many of the traditional spaces have been compromised, we have no choice except to make do with social media. Now the question it remains, how do we use them? How can we force them to regulate? What is it that people can do, or independent media persons can do, to make the platforms more conducive for their use, in a sense? And I think that it's important to note here that we are, particularly in India, actually seeing a huge wave of independent media, crowd-funded media, voluntary media work that is beginning to replace what the mainstream media spaces, the trust that are beginning to claim the trust among people, among the consumers of media, that mainstream media has lost. And just to give an example, we've been having a series of large people's movements, people's protests in this country now since around this time, 2019, since December 2019. There was a huge countrywide protest against the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act that sought to marginalize minorities. After which there was the pandemic that led to a hunger crisis that also brought out citizens groups to the rescue of others in the absence of the government and in the absence of mainstream media to tell the story that was playing out on the roads here. And what we saw in this time is that people from the protest movements themselves began to create their own media teams. They began to have their own media accounts. The farmers' protest is the biggest example of that. And they were bringing out their own newspaper. They had their own Twitter accounts. They had their own website. And the kind of coordination that it takes to run mainstream media platforms, to run mainstream media organizations, was being seen on the ground among people. Now, when we flood social media with this kind of content that is ratified by the people themselves, when people begin to tell their own stories, we are actually claiming a space that otherwise we were being pushed out of. The more you create, after all, social media, for all its faults, is an infinite space. And it runs on audience interaction. So, there are lessons for all of us to learn from there. How do you use the same spaces, the same tools to make sure that your content on WhatsApp is going viral? So you create more and more content, you create more and more of your own networks. And we are today in a place when when the farmers' protest has taken a very dramatic turn, because the government has actually, the Prime Minister has announced that he's taking back the farm laws. And on that particular day, all mainstream media channels that had been criminalizing farmers and their protest suddenly needed content to show them, in their glory, to show them celebrating. And they turned towards many groups like ours to ask us for that kind of content. So, music videos that had been created by the farmers themselves, that had been created by a group like ours, for example, were running on mainstream media channels. So there is a way. The ultimate power of democratic systems is the power of the people. And it's definitely a time when it's a very, very fertile time for us to learn to reclaim that power through the use of the same communication strategies, the same media tools, and the same kind of network.
Thank you so much for that, Natasha. Now I turn to Sarbani for her to have the last word, because you mentioned this first, that the answer is not just in online regulation of social media or just working on offline cultures of demystification, but it is a joint route. And you had also touched upon some of the points about like this ombudsmanship or like community-based fact-checking and deciding community consent for what goes on the internet and what are the limits of circulation, because virality is not necessarily a desirable goal. So maybe in about a couple of minutes, could you just like reflect on what should be the next steps for all of us? Because with that, we can conclude this leg of the discussion. We can't hear you, Sarbani. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Nandini. I would like to mention that, utilization of, we all are working towards enabling connectivity to the last mile by either through community networks or PM Vani, whatever it is. We are just, all of us are working towards enabling that connectivity in the last mile. But have we ever thought that if we enable the connectivity, eventually would people be able to use the connectivity? Because they don't have digital skills, the digital literacy is not there, they don't have smartphones with them. How are they ever going to use that? So in these cases, what I feel is that there is a relevance of such type of community utilization should be created. And because this is the way by which the community not only benefits from the connectivity, be it online or offline connectivity, but also it's a means of generating income. Eventually, if we just give them connectivity and leave it at that point, they don't know where to go about, because internet is eventually not for them, because it's in English and it's not in their local language. They cannot understand it, neither can they read it. No amount of Google voice search enables them, because their accent is not perfect. So Google search also doesn't work. So what comes in is that feeds, like, if you have looked into a movie earlier on, there is a feed that goes naturally, that next time you go into it, watch a YouTube movie, then there are recommendations. And that's when they go into this continuous viral thing of, that going into more and more feeds and not searching by themselves. So I feel that two things that really need to come about is that communities should take into their hands the relevance of connectivity. It should not be something from the outsiders or the telecom people telling that, okay, we give you connectivity, now you do whatever you want. But communities should try to use that connectivity in the best possible manner, and given an opportunity, the communities can do. And here we should not degrade them by saying that they are semi-literates or illiterates and they cannot do anything on their own. They can do a lot by themselves, given an opportunity. And community radio is something, in our communities, we see a lot of community journalism that comes about. And it is done by the communities themselves. They talk about their hardships, their problems, their challenges. Nothing is from our side. It is from their side. And the second thing is that we should also think about sustainable means of connectivity there in that location. This, I think, what I have been trying to do is that we can bring in some change from the Gram Panchayat development plan. Gram Panchayat development plan in India already has for rural development, everything is there, but there is no internet for development in the Gram Panchayat development plan. Can it not be initiated? Internet for development, can it not be initiated? And so that the connectivity remains with the Gram Panchayat, and slowly over a period of time, the villagers, the communities can bring themselves up to a level, and be with their own initiative. So that's the thing that I would like to mention.
Thank you so much, Salbani. I think you have just naturally moved us into the next panel and the next segment of discussion, where finally the power of media is about reclaiming the internet and its potential for digital transformation at every level, from the broadband pipe and people's control over it, to reclaiming the content delivery layer and reclaiming platforms from the big tech corporations, a handful of which now control the entire discourse. So I want to thank all panelists once again for their thought-provoking inputs and hand this back over to Osama.
Thanks a lot, Nandini, and thanks a lot for a great panel. First sentence before we do, don't go away, be here. We might need you to interject in the next session as well. I hope everyone from the next panel is here. I see that Harish is there. Harish, are you there? Madan, of course, is there. So Madan, you figure out who is there in your panel. We are there to fill in. But before you start, we have more than an hour, 65 minutes. We will not take a break, but if you want to take a bio break or something, please take another few minutes. We will be playing 2 videos in the meanwhile for you, and they both will are recorded as a matter of community network impact or a community network related work on the ground. Jenny and Pranita and Sheel is, can we show the video?
Audio.
Are we again without audio? So as you can see, this is, this internet on the wheel is actually going around the village, and wherever it stops, it creates a line of sight with the hub tower and connects with the internet. The same community network that is there in the village, it is about 70 kilometers from Delhi. This area was. We have another video, very short, about a couple of minutes, mostly how last mile connectivity is affecting connected to the doctors.
सब एडवाइसेस और मेडिसिन आप देख लेना, जैसे मैं एडवाइस दे रही हूँ वैसे फॉलो करना, ठीक है? advices or
so thanks a lot. May I request Raj to introduce this panel to all of us? All of you know that Community Network Exchange is an initiative of ISOC and DEF, and we have been doing it for 5 years. So Raj has been the driver. He's also the driver of community networks in India for the last 12 years. He has been hiding behind for the last 1 hour behind the screen. So Raj, can you also, because you also know this panel pretty well, you can just introduce and then we can go forward.
Thanks, Osama. I wasn't expecting to speak today, but you've put me on the spot. So I hope the first session was enjoyable for all of you. It was great to hear some of the on-the-ground stories, of course, and as well some of the ways in which we've been able to deal with misinformation, and of course all the work that still needs to be done. The next panel is quite interesting. So when we were setting up this agenda for CNX this year, I thought that, we talk about many things, but we very rarely talk about, what innovation can come about from these very rural communities. So really, and this last, since it's also the closing panel for the conference this year, we thought it would be nice to try and tie up a couple of the various themes and streams that we've had across the 3 days, as well as in past years. Because from what you can see, including from the videos you may have seen today and on other days, there is this innovation that happens. There are change makers that are brought about by empowering people at the very rural level. And community networks obviously is one way to do it. And the thing that always strikes me is that, there is so much potential. As an example, 7, 8, or maybe 9 years ago, when we were doing one of our earlier networks in India, one of the problems we had was that, we didn't have a mast to mount the dishes on. And that's where what, we call frugal innovation, or jugaad, as we say in North India, came into play, where people from the local village said, we'll sort this out. Don't worry about that. Leave this to us. You get on with what you have to do. So there's a lot of innovation that goes, and particularly frugal innovation that goes into these networks. And, seeing that all that Osama and I have seen over the last 12 odd years in doing this work, I think there is a case to be made that, if we were able to empower these rural communities a bit more, My friend Harish is on the panel today, and of course, he and I in the past have discussed about the innovation labs and so on. And one of the things I said to him was that perhaps these innovation labs should really be rural innovation labs. Imagine if we could put that sort of resources, and then the resources are not all that large, obviously, for what we have in mind. But in any case, if we were able to empower these communities a little bit more beyond just connectivity and digital literacy, and see, maybe they could come up with a new startup, maybe they could come up with new ideas that perhaps the urban connected could also take advantage of. Anyway, I don't want to preempt what the panel is going to say. So it'll be a pleasure to see what the panel talks about and where the conversation heads. So with that, I will hand over to another good friend, Madan, who I haven't seen for a while. He shares the same haircut as me. So don't mistake him for me. I'm the better looking one. So Madan, over to you. Cheers, man.
Great to see you, Raj. Great to see so many veterans, I won't say old faces on this panel again. Hi, Harish, for example. Great to see you after, I don't know, almost 20 years. And Satyam, I'm not sure if you've met, but I like that cap that you're wearing. I want to get one of those caps as well. And hi, Jane. Good to see ISOC. Many years ago, I remember meeting Windsurf at one of the old ISOC INET meetings in 1993, I think, in San Francisco. So it's been great to see over the last 20-30 years how this whole field has progressed. So let's get started now. We have just Osama till about 12:30, right? So about 45 minutes for this panel. Just doing a time check. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't hear you, but I'm guessing it's 12:30. Okay. So
yes.
We have what I like about this concluding part of the sessions, the first panel and the one they're going to have now, is we're connecting now the different flavors of what community networks means. So we just heard about community radio, for example, audio networks and things of that sort, broadcast. Now we're going to look a bit more, I guess, at community digital networks, online networks, and so on. So my first question to each of the panels is, this whole field of online community networks has been around for 20, 30, almost 40 years, I think, even in the days of BBSs, bulletin board systems, and later on to the internet and so on. So my first question to each one of you is, when you look back at this whole field of community networks, where do you think we are today? Beginning from each of you sharing the points of view of your own organization. For example, Harish, our first panelist is Harish Pillai. He is the head of OSPO APAC, Red Hat Asia Pacific. We also have with us COP Wakataki, OFA, Economic Affairs Officer, ICT and Development Section, ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Division at SCAP. We have Jane Coffin, SVP Internet Growth at Internet Society, and Satyam Dharmora, CEO and founder of I2EI. So my first question is, can you share with us, share with the audience a little bit about what each of your organizations is doing in community networks and what you've seen in the grand sweep over the last 10, 20, 30 years or so of community networks? Let's start with you, Harish. What's your take on the achievements of community networks so far? Harish?
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure that I can say that Red Hat has done much specifically from a community network perspective, but we have, as an open source technology company, so everything that we build is open source technology that anybody can use and deploy and innovate on top of. So I just wanted to point out two devices that I'm holding with me. So this is the original Raspberry Pi, the first version that came out, and this is the latest version, the Raspberry Pi 0W2. So this is about 10 years apart in terms of generation, but the same code runs on both of them. You can take the Raspberry Pi W and do the innovation on this one here. This is about $10 or so, $10 US, or maybe less. And you can have a radio, you can have the digital communication, you can do all kinds of very interesting stuff on this small little device. This changes how you do things. And all of this is being driven by open source technology. And Red Hat is one of the parties to that bigger picture. But more importantly, it goes beyond Red Hat from an organization, but it's more than just Red Hat. It is a lot of us around the world doing stuff in the space that we feel most comfortable with tools and toys. Well, toys probably is not the right term, but tools like this for that matter.
Thanks, Harish, for expanding the discussion from open source to open hardware. And I guess the next logical step would be open networks and how that can improve resilience. In fact, one of the big buzzwords after the pandemic has been resilience. So my question now to our next panelist, Siope, is, in your opinion, how have open networks, community networks improved risk reduction and disaster management facilities thanks to community networks? Siope, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madan. Before I answer your question, let me just thank the organizers for inviting ASCAP to be in this very important forum. And also perhaps to put a disclaimer at the outset that the work that we do at UNASCAP does not directly involve community networks, but the work that governments in Asia Pacific are discussing has implications for rural digital connectivity. So with that, I would like to come back to your question. From perhaps I could share some information, background information on what we do, and then I will link it to the question that you just to set a context of where we come from. The discussion so far that I've heard in the first panel and this panel, I believe governments has a critical role to play in promoting the development of community networks. And perhaps that this could be my input to this very important panel that we're here today. The work that we do at UNASCAP is that we bring together governments in the Asia and the Pacific region to discuss how can regional cooperation improve digital connectivity, including rural digital connectivity. And in the last 2 or 3 years, the discussion has been gone around the issue of regional cooperation through a platform, a regional platform called the Asia Pacific Information Superhighway, or APIS in short. And under this APIS initiative, governments has put into place 4 key pillars that would mandate what governments and other stakeholders needs to work towards together to address digital connectivity in the region. And one of those, of course, is broadband for all, which ensure that gender digital divide, rural-urban digital divide is addressed, affordable access and those. And this is where rural digital divide is an issue, important issue that member states have highlighted to address through this platform. And I'm happy to say that one of the key actions that has been discussed in the past 2 months, member states have identified the need to promote rural digital connectivity, rural digital connectivity and urban connectivity in terms of promoting what could farmers in rural communities can be able to sell in urban areas. So with that, so through this work, we partner with external organizations who are doing work in this area, and I'm happy to say that the Internet Society, of course, Raj has been critical in ensuring that we partner with ISOC and other NGOs, and we call a community network summit every 2 years, I believe. The first one we did was in 2019, and this year we managed to do one summit on community network. And in this forum, we bring in the government officials from the ministries who are responsible for communication. And also we give opportunities for community networks, practitioners, and other stakeholders who are supporting community networks to share good lessons and best practices that could be adopted in other Asia Pacific countries who are looking into promoting regional connectivity through the community networks. And finally, to come to your question on disaster risk reduction, of course, community networks plays an extremely important role, especially in Asia Pacific countries with a big portion of rural communities that relies heavily on community networks for the correct, accurate information for disaster risk. And I understand that many countries in the region are using radio communication as one key element of providing information on disasters. during and after post-disasters to address, to help out communities, and especially in rural communities. So with those, I'll stop here and happy to contribute further. Thank you, Ramadan.
Thanks, Shafi. Let's now turn to Jane. Jane is the SVP for Internet Growth at the Internet Society. Internet Society, of course, has played a major role in taking the whole Internet narrative beyond just technology issues to social issues as well. So, Jane, what are some of your thoughts on where has this whole field come over the past years, past decades? Jane?
Thank you very much. And also just a thank you to everyone for having us all here today and for organizing this event. It's really quite something to think about where we've come from. I've had lots of chats with Raj, Osama, Sarbani, and others about this. And it did start with Raj and Osama from our side at the Internet Society so many years ago, when they did the classic internet community startup back of the napkin discussion to sketch out what more connectivity would look like through what I often call some of the very most innovative networks, which are the community networks. Coming at this from a startup side, if you would look at it, but it's a rural, remote, and sometimes urban startup, to build networks where we just know that many companies can't go because they don't get the return on investment, or in some countries, the one I'm sitting in right now, they create a red line. They draw a red line literally on a map where there are poorer people, not as poor, and they go and serve the richer people first in some areas. We see this in the urban areas in the United States, and it still happens. And if you're talking about rural remote, I'm in a rural place right now, and it's extremely expensive. I'm thinking about trying to start a community network here. So at the Internet Society, this was something that all those many years ago and through to now, we've been looking at as a critical way for change. We have got to change the model for connectivity. You've got to change the rules and regulations. And if you're thinking about it, you're going from the village often to tell the story where cities can pick up this model, the community network model. We have networks from Nairobi to New York City, literally in high mountain villages, where you're taking that story and you're going to the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU, to UN, SCAP, and others, and saying, look, we need your help to amplify this message because we need change. The pandemic showed us how few people were connected in rural, remote, urban areas, and that we needed to create some new movement. We've seen through the Internet Governance Forum, quite frankly, somebody asked me the value of this thing, which many of us have participated in. And I remember seeing Osama in 2016, and a man named Ucha, who's from the high mountains in the Republic of Georgia, and Talent Sultanov, who you had the last week or the week before from Kyrgyzstan. We brought them to Mexico, to Guadalajara in Mexico, where you could feel the energy because people knew this was something that was catching on fire as a movement, and a global movement sort of started to take place because of all the work that many people here have done. And someone said to me, who are these people? And I said, because you could feel what I call the human chemical reaction. Everybody was so excited to see each other, to talk, to understand. And then you could see from Osama to Ucha, they had something in common. And from the fellows in Mexico in the high mountain areas, they knew as well. And you could see synergies and people wanting that change. And so for me, it's been something amazing to watch others start to say, okay, wait, we can do this. What did you do? How did you do it? And how do we get to those people? How do we get the funding? How do we change the universal service regulations so that we can get more money out to the rural areas for this connectivity, and so that it's sustainable? You've got to really think about ways that you can help share those stories, because every community is different, as you all know, and no one can go in and say, here's how you should do it. The community has to live it, own it, be empowered by it, and create that change from within, because that's where the sustainability is. And that's something we strongly believe and know, that if you're working together, it's not something that's just, I often say, it's not a group hug, because some big networks have talked to me and said, oh, is this really sustainable? Is this doable? I said, well, you haven't provided service out here for 25 years. You know, you tell me. And I've seen this thing happen. You see the community networks come in and providing service. And what's happening is you're seeing bigger carriers and governments thinking, I need to change things. And that's the really exciting thing, is to see government shift. Brazil just liberalized the entire 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed spectrum. Saudi is looking at unlicensed spectrum. Kenya, a week and a half ago, the licensing regime has changed thanks to the work APC has done. ISOC was helping there, but really APC was leading. And what you're seeing is different partners coming in. We're working with A4AI on a universal service study, so we can show that there's a way forward. So I think what's changed so much is that this is no longer seen as just, oh, it's a wild group of people getting together to try and provide connectivity. Yes, we may have some of us who are a bit wild out in the areas trying to get things done because we hack things. But when you're actually talking to the wide range of humans around the world, you see these synergies, and that there is a way to provide connectivity better with cheaper equipment, with people providing that, putting the masks up themselves, as Raj was saying, and sometimes literally just climbing on the rooftops during a pandemic, which is what happened in New York, to provide more connectivity. So this is something that is doable, and it's actual. It's not just us sketching things out. And you saw from the videos from Osama, this is a reality that we can all make happen if we work together to create that change.
Thanks, Jane, for connecting those very broad stories to those individual, very human stories as well. Let's turn now to Satyam Darmora, CEO and founder of I2E1. Satyam, what is your take on how far community networks have come in your years, in your experience? Satyam?
Thanks, Madan, and thanks for appreciating my cap, but I'm slightly under the weather, so I apologize for bad throat to everyone. I2E1, as you said, stands for Information to Everyone. We are an early stage technology startup based out of India. Now, unfortunately, we did not have any telecom background to start with. Now, we came in to solve a fundamental problem. How do we provide faster and cheaper internet to masses? And most of our work has been very specific to India. From day one, we are very clear that we want to impact lives of 500 million people and do it in a for-profit mode, make a sustainable business model. Because we did not know about all the good technologies that already exist, we decided to make everything bottoms up because there was a problem to be solved and we're working backward from that. So scalability and sustainability, these are the two cores at which we work. And since our work has been specific to India, I'm going to more talk about what has happened in India at a policy level and what impact is it having specifically on networks in low-income localities that we're seeing today. It has taken us almost 4 years to work with regulators in India. And today in India, there's a law which allows, and it's called the PM architecture. Some of you guys might have heard about it. So instead of going with tech first, we decided to first understand the problem completely and what are the architectural changes required to make networks, and especially when we say community network or people-driven network work. As you would know, India also has been a licensed regime. You had to be an ISP to sell or share internet. But after 3 to 4 years working with the regulators, demonstrating them technologically it is possible, making sure that all security agencies are aligned with it, we were able to get the government announce what is today called PM which is Prime Minister Wireless Access Network Interface. This is a new architecture that the government of India has announced earlier this year. Two primary pillars to one. It allows
Satyam, your connection is freezing up a bit. Satyam, just say the last sentence again. Oh, no, I think you're on mute now.
Any individual, any user who has taken sell or share it with someone else. Hello? Has been now allowed to an individual user who has taken. Am I audible now? Okay, great. So I'm saying under PM for the first time, an individual end user who has taken an internet connection is allowed to sell or share internet without the need for any licensing barrier, which means every individual is technically an ISP now. It opens up shared economy. we all have seen benefits of shared economy, whether it is in models like Uber, Airbnb, or something else, right? And that's a huge change, uh, which is what has made us really excited, because it has taken that power of distribution from large ISPs to individuals, to each individual out there, and you can do it with any kind of feed. So if you have extra internet on your mobile phone, you can sell and share it to someone else. And India probably is the first country to allow it at an individual level there. Second, of course, when they're receivers, they would be donors. And as it happens in any model, if they're receivers and donors, there's a need for an intermediary in the middle, which can be a platform. The new age guys can also create it on top of a blockchain, and which is where a lot of innovation has started to happen. With this fundamental policy change, it allows for innovation to happen so that the price of internet would dramatically go down, because you're building efficiency on top of existing assets. You're bringing in shared economy into place, which is where we've seen some amazing results. In slums of Delhi, we are able to give unlimited free internet for 30 Mbps plus speeds for as low as 5 rupees. 5 rupee would be less than 10 cents. And that's the denomination. I'm not talking about like the unit price. I'm talking about the currency itself, and we're seeing these small kids where the share of wallet is shifting from a packet of chips or a small candy onto internet. The child who's between 10 to 20 years of age, instead of going to a shop and buying a candy or a chip or whatever pocket money he or she gets, goes and buys internet for 5 rupees, 10 rupees. Now that's the power when architectural shift happens. That's the power when, in the true sense of community network as a definition, you're taking it almost to every individual to create their own network. We as a company are the first PDOA in the country. Most of our work as of now has been more focused in low-income urban areas. Now that's more driven by the fact that we want to make sure we grow profitably. The model under the shared economy and Bani architecture allows us to be operationally profitable right from third month itself. And that's the huge opportunity that we're seeing in India. And that's what is super, super exciting for us, Madan.
Thanks, Satyam. There's a couple of questions for you in the chat window. Maybe you can take a look at it afterwards and just type in your responses.
Sure,
now, we come to the end of the first round of questions. Let's go to the second round now. We have Osama till 12:45, right? So I can squeeze in maybe 3-4 questions more for the panel. So we've had a very good discussion now on where has the field come so far. We're now coming towards the end of this year, 2021. And my next question to each of the panelists is, when you look to the future, what are some new trends that you see coming up in 2022 and beyond that will impact the rise of community networks? For example, more open hardware, I guess, Harish, or more policy regulations. There's all this talk now about 5G, and people can set up their own 5G networks, etc. So are these some things we should be looking at? Harish, what do you see when you look at the crystal ball? Future of new kinds of open models for community networks. Harish?
Yeah, I think my crystal ball is out of battery, so I have to revert to a solar panel one. So I think, okay, there are plenty of stuff that is happening. The Raspberry Pi as a technology, I think is going to be a very significant, especially Raspberry Pi W2, and a whole bunch of technologies coming out of Expressive, the ESP8266 devices. They are $1 a piece, $1 Singapore dollars or $1 US dollars or something per piece, and they are Wi-Fi enabled, and you can have an opportunity to create essentially a mesh network of sorts, if you want to look at it that way. So to pick up what was suggested earlier, where if it is only if it's a short amount of a low price point for a kid to use, this becomes an opportunity for the kid to be able to now create a mesh network within the classroom, for example, or within the village if they want to. So the opportunity to innovate with open hardware and open source technology is really, it's good. I feel it's already taken off. It's going to be seen in many places which you never thought of it showing up. So that's where I see according to my crystal ball right now.
That's great. Thanks, Harish. How about you? In your case, Siopi, when you look at the future, what are some technologies or policy changes, organizational changes that you think are very important for us to watch? Siopi?
Thank you, Matan. I think from my side and the discussions that governments are having at the moment, digital transformation seems to be a very key word these days. And 5G technology is one of the drivers of digital transformation that countries are looking at. So this in the next 3 to 5 years would be a big thing for Asia and the Pacific. The challenge is if we look at countries who needs this kind of technology the most, these are the low-income countries. 5G will not happen overnight. The countries that were most likely to adopt, especially community networks using 5Gs, would probably be the ICT advanced Asia Pacific countries. So I think at the end of the day, we still need to recognize that while new emerging technologies are coming aboard, it also creates new opportunity and new challenges for countries that needs it the most. And therefore, we still need to work together to promote connectivity and the most basic infrastructure in place of low-income countries in the region to ensure that they're able to benefit from the opportunities that could be provided by new emerging technologies. Thanks, Madan.
Thanks, Hopi. Let's turn to Jane now. Jane, when you look at your crystal ball, you've got a very nice global view of this whole industry. What do you see in terms of technology or alliances or organizations getting into this space? Jane?
Thank you. If I look in the crystal ball, I see some new trends on, and Harish started this with the solar theme. Rural electrification and community networks are partners. This is something that could absolutely take off in certain areas where we're hearing this more and more in some places where they've asked, well, if we're putting in an electrical grid, I said, you're obviously going to put in connectivity, I hope, and or the other way around. Connectivity can spur rural electrification as well. So there's good partnerships and synergies there. On the policy and regulatory side, it's definitely spectrum, universal service, and new financing models. Spectrum is something that we used to be very careful about how we talked about spectrum, and now we're a little bolder because you can share the same space with the 5G community and you can be a backhaul partner for others. And on that backhaul side, low Earth orbiting satellites, there's a lot of buzz about this globally. Now we'll see if those systems are actually doable. But there's a way you could find cheaper delivery mechanisms through the LEOs for connectivity. It's exciting to think about. Hopefully something will materialize, but there are going to be lots of different policy and empowerment conversations about those networks if they do partner with community networks. So there's something to think about in that.
How about you, Satyam? When you look at all the changes in urban parts, rural parts of India, etc., technology policy, what are some things that we should be looking out for, Satyam?
So, like I said, Madan, the huge policy enabling change has already happened. Our sense is that for-profit models will take up, and there would be a lot of innovation happening around that. And because the innovation would be very, very specific to the target segment, and therefore there might be a lot of customization which happens on the tech front. So instead of tech driving deployments will drive a kind of tech. And therefore, I agree with Harish that there might be a lot of open source hardware and software on top of which these models would be built. There are companies like Helium in US which are now putting up a crypto layer on top of networks, and that's the direction in which we see the problem getting solved through a lot of innovation and sustainable models. Public money as well as philanthropic money would probably start to go more towards creating common public good, some amount of proof points to have the policy changes done. Yeah.
Thanks, Satyam. I think some of the other trends I've been picking up are things like satellites. I'm glad Rajneesh in the chat window mentioned low Earth orbiting satellites, for example. There are also all these other initiatives. I think Google has something called Project Loon. All the big tech companies are doing a lot of stuff in this space, but we should keep an eye on issues of data ownership and things of that sort, as Harish also mentioned. My next question to the panel is, we've got so many, such a big wealth of case studies now of community networks in rural areas, urban areas, country A, B, C, etc. How do we scale all of these is the big question that has faced this movement for a number of years. So Harish, what are some of your thoughts on how do we go from lots of these very interesting pilot projects to synergy to scale? Harish, any thoughts here?
I think the best way is to we need to engage with people. We need to have publicity. We need to have sessions like this, for example, talking about what is possible, bring success stories, get the kids to do what they can do best. They do in very interesting things. Let the people on the ground do what they are what works for them with the technologies that we can probably share, and then let them empower them and let them innovate on that. So that's how I look at it. I mean, that's the way to grow the awareness. Of course, if you can somehow bring forth your standard media, the other resources, that'll be wonderful. But let's not be dependent on that. Let's go by a word of mouth and by show of proof what works, and based on what works, the success story that comes from that. I think those things will make a huge difference in terms of how people can now start to grow it across the board.
Thanks, Harish. How about you, Siope? In your case, what are some ways in which we can build more volume, scale, and quality out of these individual projects? Siope?
Thank you, Matan. I think engagement, regional cooperation between not only the governments, but also community networks and other stakeholders who are supporting operations of community networks at the rural areas. A country should be able to discuss opportunities for cross-border or corridor collaborations on community network big projects. These ideas and these experiences can be facilitated through regional events, of which we can bring in all these stakeholders together. There are limits from the government sides. They may not be aware of what has worked in other parts of the region. So bringing in the community networks themselves to speak about what has worked also helps government officials to see what could be done from policy side in order to promote this. And at the same time, there is also opportunities for between governments to discuss how to scale up these community networks projects across the region as a solution for digital connectivity in rural areas. Thanks.
Thanks, Siope. How about you, Jane? What are some of your thoughts? You've again worked with so many projects across. What do you see other than just connecting the dots? How do we build scale with toolkits, toolboxes, and so on? Jane?
It is really about getting the word out and making sure that there's no fear about some of the community networks, but that community networks are partners. There used to be this skepticism that they would work. We've seen that you can create more scale. We know one network in Spain that has 80,000 users. It's across many different, it's fiber, it's Wi-Fi, it's wireless. But to echo the colleague from you and SCAP, we have to make this more mainstream with governments. It's not unique, that they're absolutely something that works. They're not an obscure thing, but to show them the models with the different case studies that our different organizations have, and to show them the options so that the governments aren't afraid to take that step to support community networks. It's really important that they see this as an easier option and one that's not going to make some of the traditional operators as nervous, because we see a lot of traditional operators and equipment manufacturers starting to get defensive, and we want to make this a happier sort of positive step forward together versus something where they think that a community network is going to eat their market share. I would say their business plan probably isn't very good if they think a community network is going to be a threat, but we really do need to bring this into the mainstream.
Thanks, Jane. How about you, Satyam? No, you're the quintessential startup doing amazing things in their small pockets. How can we scale this up? Do you think state governments across India can partner with you to scale up your model? What can work to scale up your model?
But we see role of the government to catalyze demand and educate the demand rather than giving money for supply. And that's how we have tried to evangelize it with the government. So, for example, even if there are models out there, there would still be a population that cannot afford it. So can government think of something like Wi-Fi coupons, where the players are actually paid on consumption and not for capacity creation? Now, schemes like that, which are more anchored around demand creation or catalyzing demand, is the one which is going to help scale small players. The second role of government has to be more of an enabler and reaching out to as many people and create the architecture that allows this kind of cooperation. For example, within Vani, multiple players do not require a separate authentication system. So if you are now setting up a Wi-Fi infrastructure in India, it makes it very seamless from one player to another player as you move around, because the architecture doesn't ask you for authentication every single time. So even if I switch from player A to player B, I would get connected almost like my home. Innovations like this, a third neutral party can bring players and reduce the friction that customers have to come onto the network, are going to really help in scaling way. REST points, the experts have talked about, I won't repeat them. I'm talking specifically from an op perspective. Get the customer, educate them, make the journey super easy, give them value they can't deny. If all players align these four things, the government money is also helping into these four pillars, it's definitely going to help scale.
Thanks, Satyam. I can see some very good discussion in the chat window also. We'll come to that in just a second. I've got one more question for the panel, and then we'll turn to audience questions. My question to the panel now is, basic connectivity is the first step for community networking, access to a network. What's very interesting is what gets built on top of that. So it can be content, it can be services, and so on. So the question for the panel now is, what are the different kinds of services that you can add on top of a basic network? What seems to work well? What makes sure that it can succeed in the long term? How do we scale up these kinds of content models, service models, and so on? Harish, any thoughts on that?
I think this is going to be difficult for me to give an opinion because I have not done any of those kinds of stuff per se. The only thing I would probably suggest is maybe, is there a distinction we can draw between networks that are connected to the public internet and networks that are within a particular village or in a smaller region, so that you may have different kind of services that you can make available from a localized intranet, as it were, and a publicly connected internet aspect of that kind of a network.
Okay, that's a good distinction to make there. Now, in your case, COP, what are some of your thoughts on how to layer different kinds of services, models, entrepreneurship, and so on?
Thank you, Amadan. I see there is an opportunity here for community networks to provide this kind of, to incorporate and provide this kind of services. And especially if it's e-government services, they could provide this. But when they do provide this, for example, in the case of e-education, during COVID-19 times, during lockdown times, there were issues of copyrights that came into play if community networks should be able to share e-education materials to the villages. So even in that scenario, there are issues that needs to be dealt with in order for these new opportunities to be incorporated into community network services. So just a thought on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophia. Those are some good opportunities you identified. Jane, in your case, what have you seen in terms of business models for layering different kinds of things on top of the networks, content, services, information, and so on? Jane?
There's some innovation taking place with IoT and LoRaWAN for farmers, but also for network monitoring because it's low bandwidth with LoRa. We're also seeing some tribal communities in different parts of the North America and the US and Canada looking at ways to connect elders with younger people so that they don't lose traditional information. And the last thing we've seen is the importance of the digital inclusion on the library side and using community networks as a way to get out the message about libraries and schools and health. And some of the libraries themselves are becoming community networks. So it's almost the reverse. We're seeing that digital inclusion aspect grow and grow. And also, as I think I mentioned, the elderly, but this is becoming a really important issue where you're bringing different tribal communities together to share that knowledge with the elders and the youth.
Thanks, Jane. Those are great examples. I think definitely local cultural preservation is one case study we've seen. People archiving the local herbal, the Ayurvedic kind of information, etc. In your case, Satyam, you talked to us about how earlier how people are able to access for 5 rupees a month internet, etc. Can you share with us what are people doing with that 5 rupees access? Can we learn something from the content they're using it for, the services they're building on top of it? What are some lessons we can get? Satyam?
So Madan, around 30% of the time, our primary user base is using it for some kind of information search. So they might be Googling about something, or they might be watching a YouTube video about something that they don't know. This, when we compare with other standards, is slightly higher. Another 25% goes into social media. When we look at this data, it must be seen in the context of how a normal customer also operates, because a lot of time it is seen from a very beneficiary mindset that why are poor people on social media. Now, while the real question has to be, if the entire world is on social media for 40% of the time, now here is a segment which is spending 25% of the time on social media because it's as much a critical need and connectivity solves for it. Talking about the bundled solution that you said, technical feasibility of content, even creating multiple layers on top of it exists. In our experience, it makes business sense to only do it when you are at scale. Without scale, the model starts to crumble, and doing it too early as an experiment doesn't yield business results. From a tech feasibility, yes, all of them exist. Are they part of our thesis? Yes, they are part of our thesis, but only when we scale to a level where people have started to consume the basic services. Icing should only come on top of cake. If there is no cake, having only icing is never going to help.
Thanks, Satyam. I think, Osama, there's some questions here which you may be able to answer in the chat window. There's some very good questions on what is the progress so far of some of these earlier very high-profile projects. For example, BharatNet, that's one of the big government initiatives kind of thing. There's also a question about why are the local governments, what are the local governments in the different rural parts of India doing to connect the local communities to the internet? And if not, what can be done to fill up those gaps? Maybe, Osama, you can address some of these questions over here, some of your own experiences.
Yeah, I before I do that, I think some of those questions Satyam can also address. But there are 2 points I wanted to make and also ask all the panel. One is that community network has been known and has been seen more as a tech-driven, activism-oriented, finding last mile space for connectivity. It's very important to create the pervasive impact of internet and taking it to the mass level. Is that community network also needs to be redefined. Community, because it is for the community, by the community. And when we say that now this country has come up with a policy which allows anybody to buy connectivity and sell connectivity, that is almost like creating community network. You might be doing it for, in some cases, commercially, in some cases, charitable way, in some cases, pay as you earn, in some cases, just charge enough, like the way Cafe Coffee Day or any coffee house would not charge for a connectivity, but they would charge for coffee with a penny extra because, that's the cost of the connectivity that you are providing. They are providing you free of cost. So, and then considering that India's, 3.5 billion people who are not connected, 1 billion people almost live in India, who are not connected or close to that. So it's a big global issue also, that if you want to bring them into the connectivity picture, and if you have a policy which allows entrepreneurship, ownership, distribution, no license, Raj, nothing, it comes to the topic that was the topic of the last session, is that how we can create change makers in the last mile, how they can come up and feel that connectivity is a commodity that we can buy and sell. And that is where I wanted to ask question to all of you, is that when we started as an internet 20, 30 years back, just getting internet was good enough. But now, is it good enough to have internet without context, without content, or without responsibility, or without accountability? Because now internet carries hundreds of things that we don't want, that we don't like misinformation, fake news, hate speech, trolling, fraudism, online, everything, So taking internet without accountability, entrepreneurship, contextualization, linguistical contextualization, and accountability, and is that even possible, or should we take care of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there calls for a lot of research and education also on these aspects. So it has to go beyond just content, services, and the business model. There's a whole ethical issue that has to be wrapped around this whole thing as well. Any thoughts on this, Harish? What are you seeing in terms of maybe open access, licensing, those kinds of things for networks? Harish or Jane, would you like to jump into that one? Jane, any thoughts on what Osama just raised on the overall ethical issues surrounding open networks?
Yeah, and it struck me when Osama was speaking that in order for a certain uptake, more uptake, we have to have digital inclusion. People have to see themselves and want to participate in the content, but content is always such a tricky issue. I know from colleagues who do work with some tribal communities and listening to those tribal communities, there's a real fear of some of the cultural norms being challenged and how you would curate information. And of course, I'm for an open, accessible internet, so I'm trying to say this carefully, but some communities may decide what type of content they want to see and have people exposed to. I would hope that wouldn't limit the infrastructure development. So it's a chicken egg, as they would say, or egg chicken problem, where you want the connectivity, but how do we best help educate people when they have all these options for content? And that's part of the digital inclusion equation or the digital equity equation. I don't want to pick for people, right, what they can see and what they can't see, because that's also censorship in some ways. But for some communities, I know that they don't want their children exposed to certain things. And so it's a very complicated issue for policymakers. But if you want everyone included with opportunity for socioeconomic development, what do you do? And it's a question, because some of you may have run into this in certain areas where the village elders may not want certain content, but how do you encourage them to continue to build out the network itself so that everybody has an opportunity and that you don't have people trying to speak for other people? Maybe I confuse the situation, but it does bring up a lot of really great issues to think about. And I don't want to see governments use content as an issue to block community networks for content delivery.
Thanks, Jen. How about you, Satyam? Where do you stand on this rights versus responsibilities question? I mean, maybe yes, kids want all access to this internet and so on, but I know there have been concerns that there's a lot of adult content which kids should not be seeing, and they're seeing it too early. I mean, a lot of issues are there around these kinds of open networks. Satyam, what are some things you're seeing in terms of ethics and responsibilities?
So, Madan, in the context of what Osama said, and very specific to India, with this new architecture being out there, we are betting that there would be a lot of startups and a lot of very interesting companies who would come up and should start to solve the problem of connectivity itself. Now, in the initial stages, while they're doing that, it might not be their focus area to start also thinking about how that content is being used, because they're trying to solve one problem at a time, and it sounds impossible. Now, this is where I think the role of public money and civic organizations becomes very, very interesting. You've done all the hard work, you've paved the way, now there's an architecture, now there seems to be the tech and the money also coming private sector to invest in internet for lower income people. Now, can we now start to focus on the next set of the problem, which is actually about content, right? Now, over there also, you can divide into one strictly illegal. Now, that's the law of the land kind of takes care of all ISPs, as well as within the Bani framework also. You have to abide by what land says in terms of certain content. Now, then there can be a content in the middle, right, which is where all the confusion would lie, because things are not as black and white as you would like them to be. And that's where, the civic societies leaders need to probably step up. That is probably the next set of area where the non-profits need to apply their mind and come up with frameworks which are a good balance of letting people grow while at the same time not letting anything and everything on internet disturb our minds. That is how we look at it, Madam. It would take.
Thanks, Satyam. I'm very glad you mentioned the word startups.
With the models.
Oh, go on. I thought you finished. Yeah.
Sorry. All I was saying was because startups would be in very early stage. I would expect them to actually get into self-regulation too early, and this is where a very healthy way in which non-profits and startups can work together can come together.
Yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned the word startups. A lot of my work is in that space, and social enterprises, entrepreneurs, and so on. In fact, I think there's a very big role now for these incubators in Indian colleges, schools, and universities to incubate these kinds of startups to look at social aspects of technology, connectivity, and so on. Osama, we have just about a few more questions, a few more minutes left. I was going to ask them one question about what tips do they have for the audience. Should we do that, or do you want to add something else as a closing comment before we wrap up?
I think you can wrap it up with that question and then hand it over to Raj and me to just close it.
Yeah, perfect. So maybe in just a minute or two each, I want to ask each of the panelists to make maybe a couple of comments, tips to the audience. In the audience, maybe we have a mix of advanced and beginner professionals in this space. So what are some tips, words of advice, some gyan that you want to share with the audience? Harish, you want to start?
Sure. I think if I were to request people to explore technologies that have been around for about 100 years, this I'm talking about radio communication, I'm talking about ham radio operators, getting into the ham radio space, because these are all licensed anyway. And by using them, by learning about it, and by contributing and participating in the communities of ham radio operators, you are then able to grow a different level of enthusiasm and interest at a different age group as well, because you can now do all kinds of very interesting stuff. I really like to see that taking off, rather than just only talking about the internet related stuff, is the ham radio community, because they do have an interconnectivity between the two. And so the opportunities become significantly bigger than just talking about internet connections, connectivity alone. So with that, I'll just say I'm 9V1HP from Singapore. So that's my call sign. So if you are ever on the air, I would love to have a contact with you when you are on the air. And so it's 73 from 9V1HP.
Thanks, Harish. That's good advice indeed. Don't look only at the internet, though it's the next big shiny thing. There's a lot of other old and very useful technologies also lying around. How about you, Sophie? In your case, any recommends, any tips you want to give to the audience?
Thank you, Matan. 2 points from my side. The first point perhaps is to respond to Osama's earlier question. From the UN side, I would like to echo the United Nations Secretary General 12 points of commitment that he announced this year. And one of those 12 points is one on improving digital cooperation. And he kind of proposed a global digital compact. And there are many issues, but he also mentioned to introduce accountability criteria for discrimination and misleading content in the internet. So I think for UN member states, this is this issue of disinformation and contents is a very much important issue at the global level. The second point I wanted to highlight in terms of the discussions today is that I would like to echo the issue of multi-stakeholder partnership is very important. Bringing in everybody that are involved in this space to discuss and identify solutions is critical going forward. Thank you, Matan.
Thanks, Sophie. How about you, Jane? Any quick sign-off words, tips of advice for the audience?
Yeah, there's so many organizations here that have such great wealth of experience. Take a look, start to talk to people. Don't be afraid to reach out. I think fear is often what people can create so much a bottleneck. So reach out. I did also want to just make a pitch. Also, Harish is saying with ham operators, it's really important for people to look outside themselves on different technologies.
Thanks, Jane. And Satyam, as a founder, what's your advice to the aspiring founders out there and the broader tech and business community out there? Satyam?
I think one, don't settle for mediocrity. Your customer is the king, and therefore 1 GB per day is not enough internet. You have to make sure that each customer is treated equally. If I get 100 GB access on a daily basis, therefore I should be creating solutions for everyone in this world to get exactly that. That has to be the mindset to solve it. And second is, while working with the government, it requires some patience. So instead of focusing on what's wrong and why it is wrong, if we can focus on how can it be set up for future, and then work with them, it would probably pay off. In our case, it took us 4.5 years to get Vani live working with the government. But the mindset was not to just keep telling them what all have they done wrong, but just to tell them that, hey, there's a new way in which a new future can be built. Whichever political party people might be of, they are interested in making it a better world.
Thanks, Satyam, for that focus on quality and reminding us that the goalposts are always shifting. You said 1 GB is not enough. 10, 20 years, that was unthinkable, but now even that is possible, but not enough. So, Osama, on behalf of all of us in the audience, I want to thank our panelists for their outstanding discussion, for their insights. Thanks also to the audience for dropping in all their questions and comments. And Osama, back to you and your team.
Yeah, thanks. Before Harish vanishes, thank you, Harish, for joining. I know you had said 50 minutes, but you gave more than that, and thank you very much for bringing that energy. Raj, if we can have you on video, then we can move towards closing this one. Thank you, Siope, for bringing in always that larger, big picture, when you say UN, when you say government, it's still local. When you say UN, it's global. So, that perspective. Jane, thank you for, I know it's 2 a.m. in the morning where you are, and that's huge, huge effort, and, too much to ask. And, thank you for joining and always inspiring. I know how you feel everywhere you see community networks coming up, people going into the rural areas coming up. It brightens you. I know that smile. Satyam, thank you very much for sharing the perspective of how we can treat the unconnected as a future customer, that they also need 150 GB per day or something like that. And that's how we should work in terms of, and certainly why not? If your food is delivered through internet, you need data. If your health is delivered through data, why not? So everything is being delivered through data. So you need that pipe. You need that huge bandwidth, and therefore, data is important, and that bandwidth is important. Thank you also to Anju, Sarbani, Natasha, Filomena for the other session, and Balakrishna. Thank you for making time. We missed you other day. Thank you for joining today and bringing lots of perspective. I think today's session was mostly about bringing context into the entire last mile connectivity and how various technology and innovation can help us. But we also discussed about challenges of being connected, that we can't ignore. And I will now leave it to Raj to complete it, that how we have been doing, which was a small seed of creating this platform 5 years back. This is the 5th year, sustaining regularly for 5 years for creating a platform. And then bringing people together has been showing some results, but perhaps we will be needing more support from all of you to make it increasingly more impactful. So Raj, for the rest of conclusive note.
Thanks, Osama, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and those who joined us on day 1 and day 2. As Osama put it, so we started this event 5 years ago, and it was a small event that basically was put together to try and exchange knowledge and information between parties who were involved in the work. As with most things, it's evolved over the years, and if you just look at the closing panel today, we had UNESCO on it, we had Red Hat, we had a startup, we had my good friend Jane, of course, and we had Madan, our Superman from Bangalore, moderating. So as the conversations were happening, I was just reflecting back on in some ways in how far we've come, but also realizing there's so much more that can be done and so much more further to go. And one of the things that I've sort of been thinking about today is, where do we go from here? If we look back at the work we started 12 years ago, Osama and myself, in setting up community networks in the Asia region, the landscape is very different. The challenges still remain, unfortunately. We still have half the region unconnected, but things have also evolved, right? So we can't say things have stayed the same. So there has been change. But we're also seeing some of the same problems sticking, right? Digital divides. I think we're creating new digital divides, not just the old digital divides we had before. Depending on what sort of device you have, what operating system you have, where you live, what sort of access to you, what sort of last mile access you have. I know there's a long list. I'm trying to tabulate all the different dimensions that come into play for these new digital divides. And it was a stressful exercise coming up with that list because there's so many. Affordability still remains a problem. Literacy still is an issue. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and no one can do it alone. So I think this is why, from the Internet Society's perspective, and you had COP said it earlier as well, this multi-stakeholder engagement, getting various stakeholders together, is so very important. But the other thing I want to stress is it's not just the so-called experts getting together, right? We need to hear from the people. We need to hear from the community. Often we have the case where people boilerplate what should be done instead of actually realizing what is required to be done on the ground. So I've always been a firm believer in first looking at what the community's needs are and then coming up with a solution. So with the work that we've done over the last decade and a bit on community networks, or W4C as we used to call it back then, it really was always with the community, for the community, and ultimately by the community, right? You don't want to parachute into somewhere, do stuff and leave, because that is a recipe for disaster. As we've learned, if you've been in the development sector over decades, we've made the same mistake over and over and over again. So that's why I think it's very critical that the community itself is trained up to take hold of this, because ultimately that is where the empowerment needs to be, right? And I'm sort of rambling on now, but since it's the last day, and Osama didn't give me much chance to speak today, I thought I'd sort of rant on for a little while. But one thing I do, this last session that we just had, one thing I would really like to explore going into the future. We know what's needed to set up connectivity. We know some of the bits and pieces that are required for upskilling communities, digital literacy, etc., etc. It would be really nice if we could start thinking about, okay, how do we now bring about innovation from these communities themselves, right? What we were trying to allude to earlier with this last panel. Some great examples and ideas were thrown up, but I really do hope that we can explore some of these a little bit more. And I think we need to bring some other players and actors into this conversation as well, right? Those who are working on innovation centers and things like that, and accelerators and incubation centers and all that. So Madan, maybe we can have a discussion later on and see if we can inject some of those into some of this work. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks very much. I can't see Philo here. I was going to ask her to say a few words, but it's been a pleasure to have AIBD partner with us on this. Day 2 was completely devoted to trying to explore the synergies between community networks and community radio. And I think we came up with some great synergies and ideas there. And I'm hoping, that the community radio community can become community network operators as well. I think there's a very clear path that can be followed in doing that. And we've actually been successful this year. Osama and I have turned a community radio into a community network operator. And there's a nice video that we played, I think on day 2 it was, which will be online on the website. So you consider what possibilities there are there. But most importantly, please stay engaged, please connect with us, and let's continue this conversation so that we can better deliver the opportunities that the internet can bring to those who need it the most. With that, thanks to the team involved in putting this together as well. I'd be remiss of me not to say that. Thanks very much, everyone. The list is too long, so you know who all you are. So thanks very much. And of course, to all our speakers and panelists and our sponsors who've made this possible. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we hope to see you again. Osama, back to you if you want to do a sign off.
Yes, the sign off with a formal note of absolutely formal named-based thank you to all the audience who are watching in remote areas, all the people who are watching from various parts of the world. I still see a lot of Pakistan and Indonesia and many Nepal and all that. And thank you to Internet Society and DEA for organizing this. And thank you for APC and APNIC and A4AI for supporting this, including AIBD and Act for Hope and Landscape of Hope for supporting this. We would like to keep on increasing this support list year after year. Just to give you a glimpse of next year, we are looking at doing CNX next year for almost close to the whole year in a periodic fashion. So not getting into details, but hopefully we are going to have this as a year-on activity. Periodically every month we will get engaged and we do it from the ground. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for your time. Thanks for devoting your morning, and see you soon. Bye-bye.